Good morning. Good morning, Dawn.
Good morning.
All right. Well, it is 9:01 and I know how people love to stick to a schedule. So we're going to jump right in. Everyone, welcome today. I am Casey Lett, Senior Vice President of Strategy at 352. I am very fortunate enough to have Dawn Whaley, the President of Sharecare. Dawn, before we jump in, I want to give the audience a bit of context into this format of Off the Record. We have some folks who have joined us virtually, but also some folks who are used to our in-person events. So if you'll just give me a minute, I'm going to go through a little housekeeping and then we'll jump right into the conversation.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Well, I see we have people actively joining. I think we had a pretty good audience coming in today. I'm excited to see the diverse companies represented. For some context, 352, we are an innovation and growth firm. We help companies, usually enterprise innovation the innovation organization within enterprises or growth stage companies that are seeking that scale, to find and engage new customers and markets, pioneer new ventures, and build new products, services, and business models. And so a lot of the work that we do here with Off the Record is bringing together those business leaders, those change agents, those innovators, to tell their stories. And I was joking with John before this, we used to do it off the record. It still is the name, but we are virtual and this is recorded. So we are on the record today. But what we seek to offer is really the stories of people who are in the trenches of the business. We want to make sure that from an audience perspective, the chat, please make it live, the Q&A function, want to make sure that you all get that networking aspect that so often comes with in-person events. And while we have to acknowledge we're virtual because of COVID, we want to certainly talk about the realities of what that is, but we don't want the only conversation to have today being around the impact of COVID. I think that there's something, happening at this moment in time that's changing business forever. And where Dawn and I, in our pre-call, we said, we want to talk about what are those lasting effects and what are the positive outcomes, less about just the reality that we all find ourselves in, because I think it's a bit fatiguing to only talk about it at home, at work, etc. So with that, I'm excited to have you here today, Dawn. I will let you do an introduction of yourself and of the company. I always think it's better to hear directly from you rather than me doing a voiceover. So if you wouldn't mind, would you share with the audience a bit about Sharecare and also your role there? And then we'll jump into our conversation.
Sounds good. Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Hope your week's off to a good start. And totally agree with you, Casey, that we need to find new narratives around COVID, because it has gotten, we have a rule actually in our little neighborhood of us that get together socially distanced, safe away from each other, that after 8 p.m., no more COVID talk. Like you get everything you need to share, but up until then. A little bit about Sharecare, and Casey introduced me. I'm president of the company, and Sharecare was founded here in Atlanta in the 2010-2011 time period. Our founders are Jeff Arnold and Dr. Oz, and the way that those two met was we had just sold a company to Discovery Communications called How Stuff Works. And it was there that we were introduced to Oprah and Dr. Oz. And they basically asked Jeff, who'd started WebMD, if you could do WebMD 10 years over again, what would it look like? He basically was like, the vision's the same. In 1999, it was how do you give health a homepage so that you didn't represent the fragmentation of the healthcare system online, as it was just coming online. And 10 years later, it's like, how do you deliver all your health in one place? And the biggest difference between 99 and 2011 was a smartphone. And so at that point in time, you had a device that you carried with you everywhere you went, all day long, 24/7, and it had the capacity to, record your data, both passively and actively, and ultimately, as we sit here today in 2020, deliver you real-time personalized recommendations so that you can optimize your overall health and well-being. And so that's really what we do here at Sharecare. We have a digital platform. We offer it free to consumers because we felt like if our mission was to help the world be healthier and improve well-being, we couldn't only offer that to people that paid for it. But the way that we drive revenue is big companies like State Farm and Walmart use Sharecare as their digital platform to manage their population's health and well-being. And so we have really three big customer segments. We have large employers, like I just named. We work with health plans, primarily the Blues. And so really we Sharecare have become their digital solution that they offer out to their members, which is millions and millions of members across about 7 different states. And we also have a partnership with Anthem, and then also government. And our largest government client is actually here in the state of Georgia, which is SHBP, which is the state health government plan. And we have about 600,000 city workers, teachers that use Sharecare each and every day to manage their health. And my role at the company, I've been here since the very beginning, since those initial conversations. Jeff and I have worked together for about the last 20 years. As president, I've probably worn a lot of different hats as we've gone from, basically 3 of us in 2011 to 2,400 of us in 2020, through, organic growth as well as 18 acquisitions. So I kind of ebb and flow on an operational biz dev marketing role. And just depending on where we are in the company, sometimes it's 80-20, 80 operations, 20 forward facing, new opportunities. And then right now, which is awesome, it's like the other 80-20. So it's 20% inward looking operations and 80% of, exploring strategic relationships, which is really probably what I enjoy the most is, coming up with new ways that we can work with the stakeholders in the healthcare industry, as broadly defined as you want to think about it, so that we can deliver that holistic experience to the end user and really make impact.
I love that. There's so many things I captured here. Just around, I want to dig into a bit of the different audiences that you work with. I also want to talk about, so 20 years ago, you, Jeff, other members of the founding teams, 20 years ago, you started in healthcare.
I was 12.
Yeah, I got that. I figured that you were going. 20 years in healthcare, how different does it look? We'll take coronavirus out of it. How different does the healthcare space, because you are an interesting place, right? You're the connective tissue, but you actually aren't maybe an operator. You have the healthcare systems, you have the insurers, and then you have the patients or customers coming in. And to your point, then you have large corporations, government. I'm curious, just from your vantage point, does it look very different over 20 years pre-COVID?
I could have some customers on the line. I would say this. I would say it looks different, but it does not look as different as it could 20 years later, pre-COVID. And that's such a great layup question. The funny stories back in the late 90s was, one of them was, WebMD was, I think, featured, if not on the cover, close to the cover of Fortune magazine. And they were talking about, what a high flyer it was as a company and how well it was doing and the potential of it. And they interviewed 3 or 4 doctors, and one of the doctors declared WebMD snake oil. Because you have to think, back then, it was the first time physicians were ever actually, seeing information for the first time that their patient was bringing into the office. And so, as silly as that sounds now in the era of, I'll probably Google 3 things while we're on this call just to check myself. Back then that was like, very innovative and very game changing, and there was a lot of resistance. So in 2 decades, right, that's the norm now. Like, the physician not only expects you to have, WebMD information, they probably Google it real quick so they know what you've seen before you walk into your appointment. I would say that in the last decade, from when we started Sharecare to, I'm just going to say December of 2019 to have a point in time, you did definitely see the mentality across health plans, across, benefits consulting, health systems. Everybody had fully accepted and was leaning into the concept that the world is going digital, and that, the methods and the approach that had been taken for so long was not going to work 10 years from now. And so maybe 2012, you'd have meetings, and it would be a lot of very base level education. by the end of last year, we're all speaking the same language. I'm lucky I work with somebody that's a visionary, so he's speaking like 3 years ahead of everybody else, but thus we could have very fruitful, productive conversations. And, everyone, again, health systems, health plans embrace that change is happening, but, they still want it to happen on their terms. Like we always say, from Sharecare's perspective, we always try to put the person first. And we try to think of what makes most sense for the person and then build out our functions and capabilities from that mindset. A health plan is still thinking about what they want their members to do. A health system is thinking about what their patients want, what they want their patients to do. And so, while again, there is a common language, there were still maybe different perspectives of, who owned that end user too, as we were trying to pull the stakeholders together. And I would say that was a really big evolution in our business, is when we started to think about not just consumer-driven care, but community-driven care, and recognize that while all of the stakeholders want to own the end user from, their perception of, what they want that individual to do, like I just described. But when you embrace the notion of community care, it really ends the conversation about who owns the end user and ultimately allows everybody to lean in to take responsibility for creating change that matters. So I feel hopeful. I said that. I've actually been I think, cited a few places. I was not hopeful in 2012. We got out of meetings and I was like, literally, what have they been doing? Like, what has the healthcare sector been doing? Because for a whole decade, I hadn't talked to anybody except for my doctor that was in the healthcare industry. And by 2016, I felt very hopeful because I felt like everybody was heading in a similar direction.
I love that. And I think that you all represent a really unique place in the healthcare space, right? Healthcare is difficult to change, and rightfully so. People's lives are at stake. If it were easy to flip very quickly, that could have very catastrophic events. So I recognize, and I think all of us do, you see that in healthcare, financials, insurance, any of these regulated industries. However, you all have been a startup in this space. So you have and the fact that you are delivering information, you're delivering patient experience, and to my point earlier, being a connective tissue, there is a little bit lower of a risk here for you all to be able to test, to iterate. And so you and I were talking in our pre-call around the advantage that has offered you going into this world in which the rest of the world is getting used to an uncertainty. And Dawn and I were speaking and we talked about uncertainty is our situation and adaptability is our skill. And I've thought about that so much since our call last week. And as you all being a startup in this space, you have a chance to really help people change, help companies, help organizations change. So I'm just curious around COVID being this great equalizer, we'll call it. It's a universal experience that has reset consumers, customers, companies, cultures, people, right? It's exhausting to the point in which it is equalized. Talk to me about how you all have seen this and how you've been able to respond as Sharecare specifically, and what maybe has been a unique advantage in the healthcare space.
All right, let me pull that apart real quick. So I would say that one, kind of moment that happened, it was probably a couple of months ago, is we have an incredible content team that's based out of New York and with, really smart talent. And just as everybody was talking about the new normal, they put forth this whole concept of what's normal now. And it's a nuance, but it's such an important nuance because there is no new normal. There's only there's a new normal for today, and then there's on Saturday. But what's normal now, when you start to adapt that to your thinking, it does adapt to adaptability, right? And recognizing that there are no stakes in the ground. And, because we serve health plans, health systems, large employers, and government, we can only move so fast, right? Thankfully, they have a lot of processes and procedures in place to ensure, that, everything follows protocol effectively and that, there's no harm done to their patients, to their members. And we've always adopted that too. As innovative as we want to be, our fallback-based foundation is do no harm. But when this all happened, and I always say March 10th for us was kind of just like that day where we were like, okay, this is not just a news story. This is not just in New York. This is, or affecting other places. This is affecting everybody. We, got into like rapid response mode. And the first thing we did, which I, think was, incredibly savvy looking back, I would love to tell you it seemed as savvy at the moment, is we were like, what are people thinking about? Like, we didn't even really know. It just was like, everything was so new. And so we have a partnership with Boston University and their Public School of Health with Dean Sandro Galea, who's, one of the most, if not the most, well-respected authors and thought leaders on public health, and definitely the disparities in public health. And so working with him, we put together a survey to really understand, like, are people thinking about flattening the curve? What are they willing to do to flatten the curve? And what are they doing relative to their overall well-being? Because we always want to have that lens on whatever we're doing. And so we put that out. We didn't know. We worked with publicists to, get the word out about it. But we didn't know. We thought like 10,000 would be an incredible number to get that level of respondents. And we ended up getting over 100,000 people taking that survey, really just virally. I mean, we did a little teeny blip of a butt on it, and it just kind of took off. And it was because at that point in time, people were not worn out about talking about COVID. In fact, they didn't even have the language yet necessarily to really effectively talk about it. So we went out, we did this survey, and then leaned in, understood that data based on data that we have over the last 10 years across the United States on well-being. So we could start to see trends emerge that was not just about the COVID situation, but about overall health and, financial, social, community well-being, and then start to factor that in together and bring tools to market. And, I think that in our customers, were incredibly receptive. And I would tell you this, and maybe some of them are here or not on the line, is with any business, while we believe ourselves to be a partner, and in many cases we are a strategic partner, there are certainly situations where we might be viewed more as a vendor. And that's just the reality of it. They buy our digital platform and they provide that platform to their population. I would tell you that not only was this moment in time an ability to demonstrate how quickly we could move and innovate, but in a very careful, thoughtful way, it also kind of turned the corner where those customers we had that maybe were more apt to view us as a vendor have started to view us as a partner. I mean, I have more inbound calls now from the C-suite across our investments, our investors, which we have an incredible group. The C-suite of Blue Cross Blue Shield plans are calling in. They are all now really seeing that Sharecare is, has our finger on the pulse of what's happening today, but in the context of what the impact will be tomorrow. And that's really helped strengthen our position, I think, with our current customers, and then also new opportunities.
I think that's such a great call out. And we've heard that from some of our other speakers in sessions like this, that there's a general consumer, a general population willingness, I think, to test and iterate alongside the businesses and brands that we do business with. You see restaurants, adapting, and us being willing to do that, taking virtual fitness classes, whatever that might be in our day-to-day life. But I've been really invigorated to see in the business world that we are putting aside the fear that what if this negatively impacts the relationship by introducing a different idea, and instead saying, if we all can benefit from this, even if it's a stupid idea that never moves forward, we're at least going to have the conversation, because what if there's a kernel of good in that? And I hope that that's a lasting piece, because I think that, if you think about, to your point, the vendorship versus partnership, a partnership means both parties are pouring in, therefore it gets better. And I think a vendorship is there's a one-way value exchange. And so that shift, and I think certainly in healthcare, there needs to be that bi-directional benefit in order to drive change. My hope is that this moment in time, what did you say, our normal right now, continues. That is a permeating thing where there's a willingness to actually collaborate and push for better results, even if it means it might be a little scary.
Right. Well, I think that's really well said. And I saw something yesterday that just only accentuates that point. One of the companies I think that has done an amazing job of being transparent and responsive and fluid has been Delta.
Yeah.
And I mean, Ed Bastian truly, I mean, I feel like he was one of the first CEOs that came out and said, we don't know what this means. Like here, like, I just want to tell you as customers, like, we don't know what this exactly means, but we just want to tell you it's all we're thinking about. And started to do, I think weekly videos through newsletters that he was sending out. And then other people on the team were, kind of augmented it. But, they have been so adaptable. I mean, this is like a multi-billion-dollar complex airline and, in a very, very, very difficult time, right, for their business overall. And I feel like they have been probably, one of the top 5, if not number 1, in terms of how competent I feel like they are really being thoughtful about what they're doing. So much that yesterday, all the, which we will not get into, all the, back and forth about wear a mask, don't wear a mask. And they mandated, I guess maybe about 2 weeks ago, they came out and said, you cannot fly Delta if you don't have a mask on, which certainly makes sense to protect everybody. But they left the door open. I can't remember exactly what they said. They left this little tiny crack. And so yesterday I got my Delta newsletter and it basically said, if you're not going to wear a mask, that's fine. We have an alternative for you. You can have an hour, plan to be an hour earlier, 3 hours early for your flight and an hour possibly for a doctor's appointment to get checked out. And if you get checked out and you're proven to be healthy, then you can fly without a mask. And I thought, wow, like that was, I mean, and again, I don't know what they're thinking, but I feel like as a positioning statement to kind of end the BS about, the debate in itself, it's like, fine, you can have your freedom, but get to the airport 3.5 hours, I think it was 3.5 hours earlier, and stand in line and go through this process. And I feel like if they came out next week and changed it again, they would not look like they don't know what they're doing. They look like they're evolving with what makes sense for the time.
I couldn't agree more. And I always have, we're both in Atlanta, Delta being in Atlanta. I think that probably know people that work there and know their organization well. And also being business travelers, I never know if I'm particularly drawn to Delta because of that, or if that's universally, accepted. But I think that Ed Bastian's done one of the best jobs as a CEO to put a face on the airlines, or even a lot of business. I don't know that I consistently, and I fly other airlines, Delta being the primary one, but there's something very human and very authentic to say, listen, we are in the business of helping people transport to where they want to go for business, for family, for whatever that might be. And it feels very much like they're putting the well-being of the person at the center of that. And that to me just drives, and they're publicly held, right? This is not easy to make these decisions. This is not their privately held being able to do what they want. They have people to answer to. And I think that it's been a lesson, my hope, is that to be able to go out, be bold, but also put your customer and the human at the center of it is really impressive.
And be willing to change. Like, I think this goes back to where we started, right? I feel like, I actually started my whole career in the communication sector. I was with an agency that started here in Atlanta. And so, probably nearest and dearest to my heart is communications, internal, external. And, one of the things that I feel like has been changed over the last few years is that, you used to say, oh, you're writing this message set and this is it. You know what I mean? This is your stake in the ground. Make sure that message is right. It resonates and we're not going to change it. And it has to, last for the next decade and really tell your story, whatever the message is. And I feel like, it's becoming more and more allowed, as it should be. The message this week does not necessarily, you have to have your core value system. You have to be working from, your foundation, but the messages can change based on what the situation is. And I feel like even if Delta came out next week and changed that protocol, it would not affect or reflect negatively on the company. It would reflect positively. It's like you're adapting, and that cannot be easy in a multi-billion-dollar company. So, yeah.
I even think about your business, right? Is your healthcare all in one place? Well, if the reality changes and people now have smartphones where they didn't before, it would be ridiculous if you all continued down the same path and said, no, our vision is to, create a web-based platform that doesn't address mobile phones. So I think that your point is so well taken. I want to jump into some areas. I see a couple questions coming in on the chat, so just want to make sure we're involving the group here. So the question is, how has the adoption of sharing health information changed? And do you see even stronger adoption as we evolve in a new COVID world? And so this was going back, I believe, to the questions around, you were sharing that, physicians originally were really nervous that the patient was coming in and saying, hey, I've already self-diagnosed, let's just talk about my care. And now, certainly with COVID, this real-time information. So I'm curious, it could be across any of your customer segments that you see, but how has that adoption of sharing information changed?
Well, I mean, I think, you can't even contrast it. I mean, again, in 99, it was like something everybody was just for the first time getting used to, whether it was healthcare information, financial information, or, access to legal records. I mean, that was just such a game changer, right? To all of a sudden, like, have all of that, conceptually at your fingertips. I think right now, where we are, and this is not just specific to healthcare, I mean, this is across the board, is, we are in, and it's so obvious, but it's information overload. I mean, I myself feel like I cannot get a handle on the hospital utilization right now in Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, I'm literally calling, people I know that are executives at the hospital systems to try to get the real deal, because between, what I see on social, what I see in the news, what I see on, the more conservative news versus the more liberal news, it's like, I don't know. And I would really like to know. And so, you take just that data point and you expand that, 5 billion times over every topic of healthcare. I feel like there is just such a plethora of information right now that I think it's incredibly well accepted. I think people, I don't know anybody, to be honest, that doesn't take the time, maybe my dad, 76, who still thinks he goes to the doctor and the doctor tells him what to do. But I don't think you see anybody that doesn't, research on their own. And then a lot of times get to the other end of that research info more confused and more frustrated, and then end up calling their doctor to actually get the real deal. And so that's one of the things, I guess a little plug for Sharecare that we've tried really hard to do, is we've invested in content. We could have just been an aggregator of it at this point, which we certainly have content partnerships. But, like I said, we have a team up in New York, and Atlanta and other places as well. And we pride ourselves on having very trustworthy content that people can understand and that tries to be as neutral as possible. And, during COVID, we did an exemplary job. Like, I did not think we were going to be able to do it, because it was like, the onslaught had happened, and it was like, how do you differentiate between what's important and what's not? And, our team basically turned themselves into a news desk, and we ended up winning like 4 digital health awards for both our COVID hub, but also very specific pieces of information that we created, one of which was specific to testing, which I'm sure, like, I think we all are starting to wrap our heads around it. But I mean, when testing first came out, NHN, antibody, swab, 7-day swab, 3-day swab, 2-day, I mean, it was just, really overwhelming. And our team did an amazing job of trying to simplify all that. So I think that, we're going to see, like with everything, I think we're going to see, sooner than later, filters be, represented in any electronic exchange of information that helps ensure that the information that you're getting is trusted and accurate. And I think, there's no sector more important for that to happen in than in healthcare. For us right now, we're just committed to making it, clinically reviewed, accurate, easy to understand, and as relevant as possible.
I love that. I want to talk about 2 things within that point. The first being, you all said that you made a very quick and very, it seems like fruitful decision to become, to your point, a content news desk, so to speak. And then the second, and I want to talk about how you got to those decisions. And then I also want to talk about the idea of this information being a public service and healthcare being a place that you actually have to make sure the information is accurate, accessible, digestible, and how that plays into the social aspect, certainly during a time like COVID. So the first of those, this all happened, to your point, March 10th is a very specific date in your minds. And then you all being, primarily serving patients and having your B2B customers as well, you had to make adaptations very quickly. And so how did you begin to look at that decision-making rubric? And what were some of the filters that you all came together? And how did you, I won't say you had to have it right every time, but how did you confidently say this is the path we're going in? And what did that look like inside your organization?
Right. So, and I just hate to give them all this credit, but, I'm just joking, super toast song. I would say I would say two things. One is Jeff immediately recognized that it was an opportunity to come together and demonstrate our ability to move fast and service our clients more effectively than their other partners. So, and then two is, it was really driven. It was driven by need too. It wasn't just a business decision. It was like, we want to lean in and help and do what we can to help people navigate through this incredibly challenging, scary time. Three is, I'm just saying this, and these are the instigators. So Jeff immediately saw it, right, as a demonstration of how quickly we could move. Two, we really did want to help. There wasn't a person on our team that wasn't willing to go 24/7. Not that they aren't doing that all the time, but truly go 24/7 to make that impact. And then three is, with the Dr. Oz being a co-founder of Sharecare and, a partner and a believer in what we do, obviously he was on the front lines and driving so much of, and trying to drive, I realize he got some criticism for it, but trying to drive so much of the information sharing. And so, he cared a lot and was pushing us really hard to move fast as well. So we had those three things kind of instigating us. And then what was interesting is, because we've had 18 acquisitions and because we have such a unwieldy but meaningful vision of all your health in one place, it means a lot of us are doing a lot of different things all the time, right? So we have a diabetes solution, we have a pregnancy partner we're trying to bring on board, we're trying to make the real age test more visual, you name it, we're always trying to work within our platform with a definitive set of resources. And so with that, and then we're doing several acquisitions simultaneously. So with that, sometimes it feels like maybe our management team is not necessarily all headed in exactly not the right direction. We are not all headed in the same direction. And so, a lot of, I feel like, myself and then Justin, who's our partner, and then Jeff is almost just kind of pulling everybody in and trying to keep a bird's eye view of all of the activity that's happening, but it doesn't always feel cohesive necessarily. Well, COVID changed that. We literally would start so we had the instigation and now the execution. And from an execution perspective, we put together, it was all of our senior team plus. And I think we called ourselves a COVID rapid response team, and we were doing daily calls, with a very senior person on our team. She was actually running the project management, because it needed to be so strategic and so understanding what we were trying to accomplish. And we would get on the phone, real-time spreadsheet, keeping track of all the actions, painfully go through, every single priority and understand where everybody was executing. And we got more done in, 4 weeks that you could see, you know what I mean? You could feel, touch, and see, that was tangible, then probably we felt like we'd gotten done in the last 4 months. And again, because it was we were all leaning in the same direction. And I think, from our perspective, and again, we have people all over the world. We've done 18 acquisitions. I have people in Berlin. We have people in Australia. We have people in Brazil. Our CTO lives on the West Coast. We have New York. We have Franklin, Tennessee. We have Atlanta. We had a lot of people. And simultaneous to all that, we were moving our workforce to be able to work from home, which included a call center, which does not lend itself naturally to working from home, especially in healthcare, because you have HIPAA regulations. And we have another group that does release of information, which is semi-technical for the health industry, but typically they work in, or not typically, a lot of times they work in a hospital or a physician's environment in and of itself. So we had to figure all the back end out while we were doing the front end. And as exhausting as it was, and as sad as it was sometimes on like Saturday afternoon when I felt like everybody was in their second bottle of wine in my neighborhood, and I was on my 7th conference call that day and had 2 more to go, it was exhilarating because you could see not only the impact that our company could make, but you really felt like you were part of an incredible team. And I think that will have lasting impact on our company for years.
I love so much of that. So I captured a couple of things. I was taking notes, is that there was, you saw it as an opportunity to say, from a business lens, right? You're a business at the end of the day. How can we make our customer relationships stronger? How do we become stickier, more valuable, deepen those? So that makes sense. But then also taking a strong sense of duty and a selflessness to help. And I think that's interesting. It started at the leadership, and you didn't say my teams were on a call on Saturday, but all of you, even at the leadership level, were there on those calls and taking this seriously as, I'm going to put in the time just like I would expect my people. And I think there's a lot of value in that, as far as, to your point, the lasting effects on culture, retention, buy into your vision, better ideas, all of those pieces. And then on the back end of this idea that you all were coming together to go in a simultaneous direction. And I'll be interested to see what that happens, 18 months from now. Hopefully there's a vaccine and the world looks a little different than it does today. But how that has a lasting impact on you all, of how you prioritize, how you focus. To your point previously, it might have been the leaders going in different directions to accomplish a lot, but maybe not seeing those tangible results as much as when you all were focused.
Yeah. For sure. And we've actually, just in the spirit of, adaptation, we've actually kind of took that lesson learned of, and again, big corporations do group calls all the time, but usually, and this is so terrible to say usually, but a lot of times I feel like, in those I participate, it's not posturing per se, but it's a lot of updating to demonstrate the progress of, whatever function or responsibility or accountability you kind of have within the company. And everybody checks the box and gets off the phone. We at Sharecare, most of us came, or a lot of the leadership came from more entrepreneurial environments. And, standing calls are not a big thing here. Weekly leadership calls are not a big thing here. And I almost probably had like a weird resistance to them. I'd be like, we don't need to do a weekly call or whatever. And I have to say, watching that process with COVID and seeing, even though it was painful, and like the joke was, you could tell I would be in a bad mood. Like, you know, I was in a bad mood. We got actually like sigh when I said I was there. But watching that process actually take effect and seeing, again, such tangible results so quickly, like, just was so inspiring. And so we've taken that now and we're applying that now to sales growth. And so we have a similar call. And again, it's leadership plus, the people that are actually responsible and accountable for the execution, 3 times a week, getting on a call for an hour and talking through our sales growth, issues and, the hard stuff. I mean, it can be, sometimes the call is really positive and sometimes the call is really ugly, because we're going through something that's difficult to discuss. And, people are trying to get to like who's accountable and who's responsible for whatever the pieces that might not be working in as well. But I'm also seeing like how incredible that progress is. And I feel like, 6 months ago, that would have been an email exchange, maybe with one, C-level person. I don't mean to over exaggerate that, but just like kind of leaning in and paying attention to it. And now it's like, we're coming together as a group and problem solving, and you're seeing the impact of that as well.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about in our organization and working with a lot of clients around the facilitation of great meetings is setting the intent. So to say this is a deciding meeting versus this is a share out meeting, and that shift in mindset, a share out, to your point, I may listen, I'm going to wait till it's my turn to do that. But a deciding meeting means that I have to be active listening. we can put a filter that we have to decide something today. So this is not a decision that we get to sit on for 2 weeks. And I think that it's the atomic parts that lead to the positive outcome that you're trying to go after.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
A couple of notes here. We'll change gears a little bit. We talked about the rapid response being a public service, and the fact that, I think, I don't think it is any secret that healthcare generally there's disparities across access to healthcare, access to information. I think that's one thing that's interesting about your platform being on mobile devices, where there are populations that is their primary form of connecting to the internet, connecting to information. I'm curious how one of the questions here is, and I'm going to remove business community. I'm just going to say community here. What do you want to see more of? And again, I'm even going to remove Atlanta, but from a sense of community health, that maybe is coming because of COVID, or maybe you all have had your eyes on prior. Anything there?
Well, I referenced in an earlier statement about the index that we've had for a while. So we acquired a company out of Franklin, Tennessee called Healthways, Pop Health, about 4 years ago. And they had established a relationship with Gallup in like 2011 time period to create the Wellbeing Index, which is a representation of the United States, all populations, and looking at, the holistic well-being, and had reported out on that year over year in terms of rankings. So, which state had the highest well-being, which city had the highest well-being, which city had the lowest well-being, and then kind of the factors within that, which city was, financially good, but socially not well. And when we acquired it, we were very inspired by it, but felt like it needed to be modernized. And so we have an incredible person running that group for us now, in the partnership I mentioned with BU, as well as other academic institutions. We've been working on kind of the next generation of what that index looks like. And, key to any index is data. And so one of the things that we did is, so Gallup used to basically do calls. I mean, that's what they're known for, but then also do survey in the mail with $1. And, if you opened it up, you took the $1, and, can't remember what percentage, but not a lot. People would actually fill out the questionnaire and mail it back in. And so we moved that data gathering into the Sharecare experience in and of itself, and integrated into the real age test, which is, how you know what your body's age is relative to your chronological age, and have a much more now dynamic view of overall well-being, and have started to map that into views that are just like so powerful, and have started to be able to overlay now the COVID data that we've been gathering. And so I guess one, I would say, when the question is like, what do you want to see from, communities at large? I definitely feel like we need to continue contributing data right into a data repository, dynamically real time, so that we can understand actually what's happening when. And yet again, COVID highlighted that better for us, I think, than anything we've ever seen, maybe since, I don't know, maybe a few other outbreaks, but it demonstrated to us so clearly, right, what is happening when and where relative to the pandemic. And when you start to overlay that with other information, it becomes more and more powerful. So I think that we all need to be thinking about how we can contribute that data, and then how we Sharecare, but others are as well. And then you can start doing those real-time interventions where we're not looking at data from 5 years ago that basically says, Black communities or underserved communities are the most likely to have infant mortality, and the data from 2016. It's like, we know we should be able to look at that, for last month. We should understand what was the impact of that from last month, what was the causes from that of last month, and then how do we, change that for the better. And so I think that's really what we collectively want to see happen.
I couldn't agree more on the COVID being a highlight of that. I think this is the first time that many people who maybe don't engage in healthcare generally, right? If you're healthy, everything's fine. That's not something that maybe until you're at a certain age or have a life event that you begin to tune into. And I know that's a lot of your mission to make that more of an everyday part of people's lives. But I think it's put more eyes on healthcare, the healthcare system, the insurer system than ever before. And I'll be interested to see how people begin to participate for the public good. Bob has a question here talking about, he says, access to healthcare will continue to be a huge problem in the world. We talked on this a little bit. Sharecare, how does Sharecare help to address social determinants? For instance, where people live, learn, work, play, affect a wide range of health risks and outcomes, most of which your zip code being the biggest issue where you live. So sounds like Bob has a little experience in healthcare, but I would, anything to share there?
Absolutely. So in what I was just talking about with the Wellbeing Index, we were going to a community Wellbeing Index, and a key component of that was working with BU to look at the social determinants of health. And they've actually built their own SDOH index, they call it SDOH 2.0 right now, to ensure that all of those factors are considered and intertwined and integrated with the community Wellbeing Index, so that we can look at it holistically. So that's a big step in the right direction, is one, to understand it, and then to understand it from not just the zip code level, but then understand it from the individual level, which is easier said than actually done. But that is really what we're trying to do, I would say, next, in terms of the evolution of where that heads into. And I think we're trying to be innovative, and that's not an easy, in the underserved communities, it's not an easy thing to do. And in fact, we are just doing kind of our first partnership with in Medicaid, and where we're looking at specific populations within Medicaid and how we can not only provide them with the Sharecare digital solution, but actually work on creative incentives to keep them engaged in the solution over time, recognizing that, their lives probably don't lend it themselves to having a lot of time to enter data on their phone about, how many steps they walked that day. But, one of the creative things that we're looking at right now is actually an incentive plan where if you do track your steps and track basic health requirements and, see the doctor when you need to see the doctor, if you can get to the doctor, and Bob, that's an important point too, I want to go back to, that your reward is your next month's cell phone bill is covered. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's an incentive that you're holding in your hand. And one of the bigger issues with different populations is the fact that they don't have a consistent cell phone service. So they it all happened where they have to turn their phone off for a period of time, and then they get a new number with a new service provider, and it's hard for Medicaid to be able to connect with them, contact them, and therefore they aren't in a position to be able to take advantage of their benefits. So we're trying to kind of look at that and figure out ways that we can positively impact that. And we're not the first, and I know we will not be the last, but we have hopes that, again, in a spirit of collaboration, that working together, thinking about, what really matters, that we can make that positive impact. And then I would just, and yes, they're a partner of ours, I would just say that on, access to care is going to continue to be an issue. Obviously, we've seen telehealth rise to the forefront in the last 4 months. It's like we went from Blockbuster to Netflix overnight. In terms of people accepting telehealth as a mechanism to interact with a provider, but that doesn't cure everything. And I will tell you what I have a lot of hope for and see so much potential with this was Walmart Health. And, Georgia got the first 2 health clinics in Dallas and Calhoun. And if you haven't had a chance to walk into one, it is impressive. I mean, they did it in a way that anyone would feel very comfortable going in and receiving, care from Walmart. It's incredibly low priced. It's a really good experience. It has everything from mental health to dental care. You can get your teeth cleaned for $25 to, I think some of them will have MRI machines on site, et cetera. And, in terms of when we're seeing all these rural hospitals close down and we're seeing the impact again of, the pandemic and ERs, people having to drive, 80 miles to be, submitted to an ICU away from their family. We still have to address those issues. But I think, when you think about the impact of Walmart actually offering these health services at affordable prices, and they're going to be literally, I think they're like 10 miles from almost every home in America, that's a game changer. I mean, that is something that gives me a lot of hope.
That's fascinating to me. And to your point, we had Mark Gorlin from Rhody on a couple months ago, rather.
Oh, yeah.
And we were talking about just the fact of the Walmart, and there were a couple other retailers, but the fact that they permeate so many communities, right? More so than many other organizations, retailers, et cetera. And so being able to use that as a hub, I think, looking at the benefit that they offer on paper, which is access, and
Right.
then saying how does that become a hub for these other things, I think is fascinating.
And it's not only access, it's comfortability. It's like, it's like they already in many communities are truly kind of part of the cultural fabric of where people interact and, a social activity over the course of a weekend. And to make it that easy for somebody to have access to care and affordable, like I'm super excited about that. And I was talking to them and asking them, did they see the same effect that a lot of the elective surgeries and, I saw some stats that were saying that, pediatricians, kids aren't getting their wellness checks over the last 4 months like they need to. And really, they did not have a negative impact. They are pretty much, the Walmart health centers here are pretty much as full as they were, which is 90% capacity at all times, even over the last 4 months. So people were still getting the help and seeking the care that they needed.
I think that's fascinating. You sharing this has been one of my first exposures to it, so I'm going to be doing some research after. Closing thoughts here. We have about 7 minutes left. I want to be mindful of everyone joining us today, getting them back to their days. You've talked a lot about partnerships. Yeah, I know you mentioned acquisitions, 18. That's massive. That's a ton of companies coming into one, technologies, cultures, people. But when you're looking at, and you said specifically your focus has been BD, marketing, partnerships, how do you begin that analysis of who is a good partner for Sharecare? And I'm sure there's some people that come to you, some where you seek them out. And what is it that you're looking for in those strategic partnerships? I'm sure COVID has opened up doors for maybe unique ones, but just curious of that thought.
I mean, I have to start at the basic. I mean, it's always that shared vision, right? Like you have to figure out if whatever the company is, if it's a 2-person, Georgia Tech, startup that's looking at MSK and has a really interesting capability that they built into the phone, or, Healthways Population Health, which we acquired 4 years ago, which was truly 3 times our size when we made that acquisition, which was, an interesting endeavor. You have to have the shared vision. And then I think, the next key that we look at is, the business rationale of the partnership, right? Like, what are we trying to get? Is it additional functionality into our comprehensive platform? In some cases earlier on, it was to allow us to have access to revenue, right? That could grow us, allow us to have access to customers that we knew we could grow with the capabilities that we were building. So really, what is like kind of the business rationale that you needed? And then it comes down to the people. And I've seen with us, and again, in this business, we've been very partnership centric and acquisition centric. In every business, we really have been. And the times, even if the vision maybe isn't perfectly shared, you find out once you get like deeper into it, or maybe the Georgia Tech guys said they had a couple capabilities that they didn't actually have. You can always make that work, but the people have to work. You know what I mean? It has to work on a personal level. And we've been really lucky. I mean, truly, in all of the deals we've done, especially the acquisitions, we've acquired companies that have leadership that work really well within our culture.
I love that. I think we could probably do a whole other session on assessing people and culture prior to merging, because I think that is one of the most difficult and complex things to do. Last question, Bob, you're coming in with the heavy hitters today. He says, what do you see as the biggest risk we will see with the healthcare transformation ahead? And so you and I talked a little bit about future predictions and things in our pre-call. So this is a nice way to, I think, round off the conversation. And I'm going to caveat that. He said biggest risk. I might say biggest opportunity as well.
I think, I don't know if it's a risk. I think the area is what we just talked about, which Bob, you brought up before. And it's, really addressing a huge percentage of our US population that does not have good access to care for multiple reasons. And I won't go through all the reasons. And I think based on your questions, you probably know what they are, but it's just like, it is like insurmountable at times. We just have to break it down and think about, how we are going to get those communities the care that they need. And that has just been so blatant with COVID and the pandemic. And so I would just say, I don't think it's the biggest risk, but I think it is the biggest challenge. And it's one that we must address. So, and I'd love to tell you I have all the answers, and I definitely don't, but it's something we are thinking a lot about. I would say the biggest opportunity is, I think the millennials on down to Gen Z, I just don't believe you, Casey, are going to accept healthcare in the same method and manner that we have accepted. And I think you're going to force change into the system. Whereas, and I think that'll be the first time from it's going to be a pull effect, in that we're going to see patterns emerge that this is how you're going to accept your interaction with the healthcare system, and it's going to change because of that, especially as the generations continue to shift. So
I think that's fascinating, and actually a great place to end, of, the power of that consumer. I won't even say patient, but consumer, and their, this, as to your point, millennial, and then upcoming generations come in and actually have buying power, influence power, their ability to drive change, access to information.
Yeah. And you care. And it's going back to the concept of Sharecare, and we had talked about this before, of, all together better, which is this whole concept that we're working on. It's your generation not only is going to expect things to be delivered differently, you're going to expect the healthcare system to take care of everyone. And so I think with those expectations, we're going to see significant change.
Absolutely. Dawn, this has been such a great way to start my morning. Thank you for joining. I know we touched on a lot today. We touched on, being a technology company in the healthcare industry, how you guys manage change, uncertainty and adaptability, acquisitions and partnerships, healthcare and public health. And I hope that I'm seeing just feeds come in from the group that they're really enjoying today. So thank you so much. Genuinely, it's been great to have you. And despite being on the record, I think we fostered a really candid conversation.
Okay.
I want to share with the group, for those of you who will be joining us at our next Off the Record, we do these monthly. August 11th, we're going to have Mike Tedasco. He's an innovation leader from PayPal. And so going from healthcare, a very regulated industry, into financial services. And I imagine a lot of the themes that we heard today will come across in maybe different ways through that talk. So it'll be for over lunchtime, 12 to 1 on the 11th. And if you're joining us today or on our mailing list, then we'll be sure to send out an invite. So thank you all, Dawn. Have a great day, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Bye.
Bye.